Let's take a look to our fabrics first. I will be using double knit scuba. There are many different qualities of clothing scuba. This one is two-way stretch and very durable. Another good option is stretch taffeta. It has a pretty good stretch in sideways and no vertical stretch at all. Then we can also use stretch Duchess satin or stretch Mikado satin. We can use bias grain to allow more stretch horizontally. For the lining, I recommend using the same fabric as your top fabric to make sure that the stretch is similar. If your top fabric is very thick, you can use lighter fabrics such as lycra for the lining as well. Let's check the other materials and tools. I am using 1.5 cm wide Rigilene boning for the front and back, and twill tape to cover the boning. I also have painter's tape to cover the ends of the boning. Then I'm using invisible mesh elastic for the shoulder straps. Make sure to have stretch needles and stronger denim needles as well. I am using size 3 hooks and eyes. You will also need needle and thread for hand sewing. Let's start cutting the fabrics next. I place the lining fabric on the table first, folded once. Then I place the top fabric on top, again folded once. I make sure that the greatest stretch is on width and that both fabrics have the same grain direction. I check that the grain line is correct on every piece. I first pin only the larger pieces on the fabric, making sure that the layers won't shift. I added an extra centimeter to the side seams, but our patterns already come with 2 cm seam allowances in the sides and the bottom. Next, I cut all the notches that are marked in the pattern. This is very important when aligning the pieces together. I also cut notches to the waistline. I cut the insert separately using the same fabric. It is folded once to cut 2 pieces at once, the top and the lining. I cut the notches to the corners of the insert too. Next, I am going to cut the facing again from the same fabric. The fabric is folded and I have placed the center front on the fold to have one symmetrical piece. All the bodice pieces are now cut. Next, I will be connecting the lining pieces together with the top pieces. I pin them carefully together to make sure that they won't shift during the serging. Now the pieces are ready to be overlocked together. You can also use zigzag on domestic sewing machine. After serging, I pressed all the pieces with steam. Next, we start connecting the panels. I am marking the alignment marks once again to see them better. First, I will be connecting the insert. I am checking that the marks align together. First, we sew the center front seam together. I am sewing only until the first notch. If your fabric has any vertical stretch, I recommend using stretchy stitches. Then we are going to connect the other side of the insert. First, I connect the upper notches together. Then I connect the ending point of the insert together with the lower notch. I pin the remaining part and sew it together. Then I'm going to connect the other side. Again, I press everything flat with steam. Next, we are going to connect the remaining panels. First, I pin it together from the notches. After that, I press the seam allowances open. For the bust, I recommend using tailor's ham. I like to cool it down by pressing it with my hands. This helps the seam allowances to remain open. Next, I am checking the fit on the mannequin. I especially check the underarms to make sure that there won't be any extra space. As you can see, it is a little loose, so I can take a little bit in from the princess seams or the side seams. After all the adjustments are done, we will finish the upper edge with the facing. We want all the seams around the insert turned outwards like this, but the upper edge must remain unfolded like this. Therefore, we must cut notches to the connecting point of the insert to allow the seam allowances to turn to opposite directions. Now you can see that the seam allowances can turn correctly around the insert. Be careful not to cut too much. Keep it a little below 1 cm. The stitching line of the facing must go along the drawn line. Be careful not to cross the gap between the beige and the pink part. Keep the stitch on the beige area. So don't stitch from here, but stitch here instead. Again, not from here, but here. Let's pin the facing next. Make sure that the seam allowances remain open underneath. If you want to reduce some bulkiness in the backside, I recommend trimming the facing from the back. My seam allowance in the back is 5 cm, so I am going to trim about 5.5 cm. This helps to reduce the excess material when the back seam allowances will be folded in. Next, I will be sewing the facing with straight stitch, but you can also use zigzag for this. In the corners, put the needle down, lift the foot and make a turn. And same thing here, needle down, lift the foot and turn. And now I am making sure that I keep the stitch on the beige area like I showed before. I am also constantly checking that my seam allowances remain open. Next, I am gonna cut a notch to the center front. I also trim the excess material out of the corners. I cut some notches to the underarm as well. Next, we flip everything around. With the sharp corners, I am helping with the needle. Next, I am going to stitch the facing to the seam allowances. It is called understitching and it helps the facing to not to roll outwards. I cannot really understitch the sharp corners, so we will skip that part. I am only going to stitch here from the back and then move to the underarms and the front. I make sure that the seam allowances are turned to the right side under the facing. So basically the facing will be stitched to the upper seam allowances. I am trying to pull the facing slightly outwards while sewing. Next, I press the edge carefully with steam. The facing can be top stitched, but I am going to blind stitch it later, do not to have any visible stitches. I mark the bottom seam allowances with a stitching line. This helps when connecting the bodice with a skirt or a panty. Next, I am going to fold the back seams in for the hooks and eyes. I am reinforcing the back with 1.5 cm wide raglan boning. I keep it a couple millimeters away from the upper and the lower edge. The ends of the boning are recommended to burn with a flame or cover with tape. I am using painter's tape to cover them. It also makes them less sharp. Then I am going to stitch it from here, from the inner edge. I recommend using a strong denim needle for this. Then I am folding the upper edge in and then I fold the back in. Before sewing, I press it carefully. I am going to sew it about 1.25 centimeters from the outer edge. I am trying to pull the fabric straight under the foot. Now the back is almost finished. I am going to add the modesty panel under the hooks and eyes later. But first, I am going to add the raglan boning for the front as well. This is optional but recommended for more support. I use twill tape to cover the boning. The bone can be placed under the facing like this. but I like to place it on the top of the facing, so it is easier to detach if necessary and it shows less from the outside. I am simply gonna hand stitch it on the seam allowances and the lining of the insert. Next, I am blind stitching the back seams and the facing to the lining. Next, I am going to add the shoulder elastics. I am using double invisible mesh elastic, so I measure 60 cm for one strap. I folded it in half and pinned it to check the correct placements before sewing. The straps can be also stitched by hand if you don't want the stitches to show from the outside. Now I am going to make the modesty panel under the hooks and eyes. I am measuring the back excluding the lower seam allowance. Then I add 1 cm seam allowances to both sides. The width of the modesty panel is about 5 cm when it's folded. Next, I'm gonna sew the ends. I trim the corners a bit and flip it around. I double check that the measurement is correct and then I search the other side. Next, we are gonna place it under the back edge. I like to stitch it about 1 or 2 mm from the existing stitch. Next, I am going to hand sew the hooks and eyes. I measure them about 4 to 4.5 cm apart. I'm not gonna add the last one yet. It will be added when the panty and the tutu is attached. When placing the hooks, I am making sure that the tip of the hook is about 2 to 3 mm from the outer edge. Don't forget to sew the tip as well. The eyes can be placed 1 to 2 mm over the edge so that you can see them peeking a little bit from the outside. Remember to sew the sides too. As you can see, the eyes are about 1 to 2 mm out from the edge and the hooks are more in. This makes it easy to close them and still keeping the gap minimal when stretching. Now the bodice is finished. Next I will show you how you can connect the bodice to the skirt. There are 2 different ways to do it. First option, which is commonly used for stretch tutus, is to connect the panty directly to the bodice and sew the nets afterwards. The other option is to connect the bodice to a tutu skirt that already has a basque and the first net layers, just like this one has. But it is also possible to connect the bodice to a tutu that already has all the net layers. It is recommended to have the tutu skirt still open from the back seam. It makes the connecting much easier. The bodice can be simply pinned under the skirt and sewn by hand or by sewing machine. This is how long-line bodices are often attached. It is easier to detach for alterations. This bodice can be connected to a non-stretch tutu as well. The remaining hooks and eyes will be added when all the net layers are attached. For any concerns or questions about our pattern, please contact us via email. Thank you for watching.